Colours, fabrics, shapes, they all mean something. And decoding what Tudor clothing says is an art all to itself. Hello, I'm Ruth Goodman, and today we'll be exploring how the Tudors got ready for the day, what clothes they wore, and how they presented themselves. When you think of the Tudor period, you might imagine rich fabrics, ruffs and jewels, or perhaps bad teeth and terrible smells. But how true are those cliches? Today we'll be diving into the world of 16th century personal hygiene, fashion and clothing. Looking good and staying clean might have been harder than today, but it mattered just as much to the Tudors. So we all know that Tudors didn't go in for baths, or at least not many of them did, and not very often. But that doesn't mean they had no personal hygiene routine. Of course they did. Quite a simple one perhaps, but nonetheless something that people were taught as children and something they expected to follow all their lives. One of the ways we know about this is writers like Erasmus giving instructions to small boys. Average 10-year-old needed to know how to look after himself, how to present himself in a clean and tidy fashion. And he gives us quite a lot of clues about the normal routines that people followed. So you would hope, all things being equal, that in your bedroom or wherever it was you slept, you might have access to a jug of water and a bowl and a cloth. And that's a good way of getting yourself clean in any era. So, you water, pour a little bit into your bowl. I mean, it's going to be cold water probably. And you're going to splash your face and do your best to get your hands and your face as clean as possible in that bowl of water. So you've got your towel to dry your face and your hands, and that is the absolute minimum. I mean, hopefully you would go on and also do a few other bits of your body as well. Perhaps in order, from top to bottom. Maybe you do a quick bit, in places that might need it. Finish off with your feet. That way, obviously the cleanest water for your hands and face, moving down. You can, of course, chuck any water that gets dirty, perhaps even out the window, and have a fresh bit from your jug. So you've had a basic wash. Not too much water, just a little bit, more of sort of a damp cloth rub down than anything else. But you've got the worst of it off. Then you need to comb your hair. Extremely important, and everybody has a comb. They were very cheap. We were importing them in huge numbers, particularly from Germany. You could get expensive ones, but there were an awful lot being imported that were halfpenny combs. That's affordable for almost anyone. And it's interesting that when the Mary Rose went down, and we found all the things left behind from that shipwreck, we found considerably more combs than we found bodies. What it says to us is that the ordinary men, not just the officer corps, but the ordinary men on board that ship, sailors, had their own personal comb. Not that surprising, really. You were expected to comb your hair, Erasmus tells all those lads to do so, every morning, very carefully, and most Tudor combs had two sides, one for sort of tangles and one for a deeper comb, so that you could keep yourself free from head lice. An important thing to bear in mind. However, much of the hygiene isn't about necessarily the washing of your body, it's about the washing of your underwear. Underwear is central to the concept of cleanliness in Tudor Britain. Everybody wore a full layer of linen underwear. Starts at your neck, goes down to your wrists and down towards your feet. Now for men, that's a shirt coming up that ends sort of just above the knee. A little slit at the side, and ideally you would tuck those tails around yourself before you got into your breeches so that you're completely covered in the linen from your shirt. And then, of course, you've got stockings, long socks down on your feet. If you're a woman, it's more like a nightie. So it's just longer, basically. It's like the shirt, same as the men, and it goes right down towards your ankles. So that again, all of your body is covered in this linen layer, which can be washed easily. If you keep changing your underwear, if you put on a clean set, think about it, this is linen. It's not cotton, it's not polycotton, it's not some modern synthetic. This is linen. And it's very absorbent. It can take a huge amount of your sweat and grease and dirt into the fabric of the linen. So when you change it, you're taking that away, getting rid of it, and you put a fresh lot on, which draws more from your body. The more times you change your underwear, the cleaner your skin will be. And this is how many Tudor people thought about cleanliness. It was about changing your underwear, having as much clean linen as possible. And they called that changing to shift. And you sometimes get little sort of like snippets from people who are moaning about others, going, he scarce shifts, you know. Meaning that he stank because he wasn't changing his underwear often enough. There have always been people who are more finicky about their cleanliness and people who are less interested in cleanliness. We're people, aren't we? We come in a variety. I cannot emphasise too much just how expensive clothes were in the Tudor period. Most people owned very few indeed. If you were to look at a fairly ordinary person, you'd find that essentially they would have two sets. That is, their ordinary work clothes and their Sunday best. Maybe they would have another spare apron, another spare cap, maybe a couple of spare shirts, maybe a couple of spare socks. But essentially, they've got two outfits. One of them could be really quite worn as a work outfit. And as the Sunday best began to wear, then you'd shift over. The Sunday best would become your work outfit and you'd try and replace with something new. But when I say new, I mean new to you, not necessarily brand new. Most people ended up with a very eclectic mix of the occasional new piece and a lot of second-hand pieces. When a more wealthy person wanted some clothes made, they would go to the tailor and possibly go and buy the fabric themselves, and they'd take the fabric to the tailor and they'd explain what they wanted. Pretty much everything was bespoke, and a tailor making it would make a very sturdy garment, often with many layers, interlinings and facings and extra bits here and extra stiffenings there and bindings around the edges. They'd make something truly sturdy, something that will last, something will wear. And if you've spent, well, in fact, the equivalent of the price of a small car on an outfit, then you want it to last, don't you? You're not going to be happy if it falls apart in 6 weeks. You need this thing to last. So they were beautifully made. Now, if you're wealthy, fashion moves on or it gets a bit stained and you know, this isn't good enough. I need a new one. So what do you do with your old one? Well, many people gave them to their servants, almost in lieu of wages. And the servant looks at this thing and says, well, I can't be seen walking around in the master's cast-offs, it'd be a bit odd. So he sells it. And this fuels a huge second-hand market. People at the bottom of the pile are often wearing things that were once upon a time really rather nice, made by a tailor to last. Okay, now by the time they've got their hands on it, it's 20 years old and they're the third person or maybe even the fourth person to wear it. And it's probably been altered several times. Somebody has stripped all the posh buttons off and all the posh braid and replaced them with something cheaper and more serviceable. It might have been expanded a little bit or taken in a little bit. It might probably have darns on it where that's worn. They might have patches. But nonetheless, essentially, it is a high-quality garment that has been worn a lot. People at the bottom of society very rarely have completely new clothes. And you can see that too if you look in people's wills. Clothes are so expensive that people leave them as bequests to their friends and their family. It's hard to think of that now, isn't it? Imagine getting a second best coat as an inheritance. But, as I say, in a world in which clothes new could be the price of a car, who's going to turn their noses up at a gift like that? Now, the clothes themselves, what are they? They're made mostly of linen and wool, with the occasional piece at the top end of silk. Linen is really hard-wearing stuff, which is just as well, and indeed so is wool, and both can be manufactured into a whole range of products, some of which are sturdy, some of which are very fine and soft, some of which are stretchy, some of which are very rigid. You can do a lot with those two fabrics. So although we say linen and wool is pretty much what everything's made of, there's quite a lot of variety. This is a man's shirt, and it is a very fine shirt made of soft, fine linen. And you can see how soft it is. Look, just the way it drapes. But the thing is, he might not have worn this right next to his skin. This is an embroidered shirt. You can see the beautiful black work on the edges. This may well have been an overshirt with a plainer one underneath. The one underneath with no embroidery can be washed easy. This one doesn't get washed quite so much because of the embroidery. It's got to be handled a little more delicately. Now, if you're the owner of a shirt like this, beautiful fine linen, embroidered, you probably have nightshirts and day shirts, as well as undershirts and overshirts. And you probably change your shirt as frequently as possible to keep yourself clean and beautiful. At the bottom end of society, you might have to wear the same thing day and night, and you might not have it, you might have 2, 3 that you've got to cycle through, so you might only change it once a week. But you would be made of a much heavier linen, something more like canvas, that can cope with much harder wear. Not quite so comfortable, but it lasts. What about other things? That's a nightcap, and just like your body should be covered in linen, so should your hair and your head. This is a man's nightcap for wearing in bed. But many men wore a little similar cap underneath their hat so that their hat didn't get too greasy from their hair. Women, of course, always wearing head covers. Particularly, can you imagine if this was your outer hat? This is a little statute cap, by law required to be worn by men unless they were gentlemen or under the age of 6, on Sundays at least. And it's knitted, it's cheap, it's a workaday thing. Keeps the rain off, keeps the wind off, keeps the cold off, but it's a bit itchy. So having a linen cap underneath makes it just that bit more comfortable. I've got another thing here, which is a nice little coat. Look at that. This is not a dress. This is a coat for a small boy. Here he is, about that high, not yet wearing breeches like a man. This is a boy's outfit before he's been breeched. It's from quite early, so you can see he's got quite fashionable-looking little Henrican sleeves here. This is his touch of masculinity, even though he's in skirts. Clothes carry so much meaning in this period. They tell you something about somebody's social status, about their gender, about their age. This can only really be worn by a boy up to about the age of 7, so even if it was big, you'd know exactly what was going on. And the sleeves give you the fashion. Even though it looks like a dress, it couldn't possibly be worn by a girl. The shapes are all wrong. And the colours are interesting too. This is quite a cheap colour. This is made with madder. And that puts it, in the middle, sort of middle or lower ranks. It's not the sort of colour that you'd expect on a gentleman's son. Colours, fabrics, shapes, they all mean something. And decoding what Tudor clothing says is an art all to itself. I mean, I can give you a few basic clues. One is all shades of red, including pink, are masculine. All shades of blue, including powder blues, are a little bit feminine. Although many people dressed their servants in blue because it was cheap, so it's also got an overtone of being subservient, which sort of fits with the Tudor ideas of being female. So blue is not a colour you would wear if you wanted to be the master. Blue is the colour you would wear if you want to be a little bit deferential. Reds are considered much more martial, much more strong. They reflect the blood humour, the thing that makes a man masculine, whereas blue suggests the phlegmatic humour, wateriness of weaker female. Other things about colour. The poshest colour, the most expensive colour, was black. So if you want to show your wealth, you wear the deepest black clothes you possibly can. It's tempered with an idea of sort of respectability and sobriety. So doctors, lawyers, that sort of person would turn themselves out in black. Whereas at the opposite end of the scale, green is for, well, young lads having a lark about. It's very full of energy and spring, youthfulness, and maybe a bit of mischief. It's the colour of extravagance and revelry. I hope you enjoyed today's video. Next time we'll be venturing into the Tudor bedroom to learn more about Tudor marriage and what really went on behind closed doors. Don't forget, you can watch all 7 episodes of my Tudor Life series by downloading the History Extra app.